G'day. Welcome. Thanks for coming out on a cold night. We rode from Hartlepool. We rode our bikes from Hartlepool this morning, and it was between 6 and 8 degrees Celsius all day. Now you're probably thinking, oh yeah, it's not too bad. But for the two of us are from the Great Southland, and that's about as cold as it gets in the morning riding, and I was cold most of the time. But the heaters are on out there. I've got my merch on. We're pumped and ready to go. Thanks so much for a great week. Well done this week. It's like amazing. I don't know if Richard's here. Can you just have a look at Richard Pearl up the back there and just get a Richard. He's made the whole week happen really with the help of an amazing team, obviously. But congratulations, Richard. An extraordinary week and really impressive stuff. So I live in Australia. So these slides are almost identical. But this is a really important map for us as Australians because this shows all of the countries that were part of our continent before we were colonised, and I was part of the colonising people. And all of these are nations, and we still recognise these nations today, and it's custom in Australia for us to always acknowledge the land of the people on whose land we meet. And that's been a really powerful experience for me as a non-Indigenous Australian to start to understand these ancient cultures. And we, as a scientist, there's so much for us to learn from ancient cultures. But it's also given me a respect for coming onto anyone's land. So I really want to say thank you for coming out tonight, but also thank you for having me in Durham. And I walked around and got a taste of what an incredible history there is here, and the villages that we've ridden through over the last few days. We have nothing like that where I live, and it's been a real privilege to witness that stuff. Who knows what this is? Coronation Quiche. So did anyone go to the World Congress on Endometriosis? Right, I did. And I talked about this quiche. So I was giving the closing plenary at the World Congress on Endometriosis at exactly the same time as the coronation. And I thought I'd do a little survey at home. So one of the beautiful Anna, with whom I share my life, one of her friends brought around some coronation quiche. Did anyone make the coronation quiche? Can I just so you can reflect on the future of your nation, under the guidance of this person, the coronation quiche has broad beans in it. And tarragon. I mean, really. This was a slice, and there were 4 people eating this quiche, 4 Australians, and I thought this might be able to give an insight into the Great Southland's perspectives on the coronation, perhaps. Let's see how the quiche goes down. And the quiche, there were four people. The people my age, they ate about a mouthful of it and thought it's not really for me. I can understand that it's a good quiche. It's got a lot of history, that quiche, and there's people who have fought for that quiche, I understand, but really it's not for me. Another person there who was about 30, didn't touch the quiche, like the middle bit, but ate all the pastry, which was Australian. And then my 18-year-old son, the new Australian generation, just pushed it aside and went out and got some kangaroo steak. And I thought, that's a very interesting insight. Anyway, just acknowledgement of your new coronated king. Coronated, is that a word? Okay, so the full transparency, I'm selling you information, right? I am a scientist. We generate knowledge through experiments and implementation of the scientific method. And then I try and sell it to you guys. And so you need to know what's in it for me, because the brain can't exclude data, right? My brain can't remove information. So you need to know that if you buy a book I wrote, I get royalties. I have consulted to these companies, and relevant to tonight, clearly Connect Health, because Connect Health, Flip and Paint is powered by Connect Health. Reality Health is a virtual reality platform that I will mention at the end of my talk if I've still got time after my memory stick debacle. I've received free stuff, like a scooter, once, which is quite cool. I received some clothes. Noi Group's most relevant there just because Noi Group publish the books that I've written. And I've got some non-for-profit disclosures there just so you know what's going on for me. So, anyway, the way to get here, so I've worked out the answer to jet lag. It's quite a recent discovery, but the trick to not getting jet lag is that when you walk up and you enter the plane, you turn left. All right, and I was only able to do that because of the generosity of the World Endometriosis Congress, your government, Defence Rehab Centre down at Loughborough. I'm going down there this week. Connect Health Flip and Pain has contributed to that, and I'm running a 2-day course in Amsterdam in a couple of weeks, in 3 weeks. So that's how I got here, and being able to lie down at the front of the plane. So the problem of pain. So you're all here because you know this is a problem, right? Am I right? Yeah. But it's probably a bigger problem than you might realise it is. And these are data that are just presented in a particular way from the Global Burden of Disease studies. These are multi-million-dollar research studies with literally thousands of researchers around the world that document the burden of disease, and they document all sorts of costs, including the disability associated with different health burdens. And if we were to suggest this square here represents all of the years lived with disability due to a health condition, we can then say, okay, well, of all of those conditions, what proportion of that is the disability due mostly or significantly to pain, to persistent pain? And if we were to represent it graphically, it looks like that. So 77% on the last data, 77% of humanity's disability burden is due, at least to a significant extent, and a big chunk of it entirely, to persistent pain, not to persistent injury. And if any of you have heard me speak before, you're probably already waiting for me to say that pain and injury are different things. But these data really ram that home. This is years lived with disability of humans because they have pain. So these are my 3 themes for tonight. These are the 3 things I'm going to try and get through, and it's going to be a whirlwind so that I can get to the end and talk really about what I see as a really exciting opportunity for us as healthcare professionals to drive our communities towards reducing this disability burden of chronic pain. Complexity, bioplasticity, and ambition. So this is my plan. I'm going to try and sell you the idea that complexity of pain makes things really tricky for us as healthcare professionals. It makes things really tricky for people who are challenged by pain, absolutely. I then will suggest that we thought that was hard. Well, it becomes a lot harder when pain persists. And that's because of bioplasticity, which is neuroplasticity for every biological system. We know this is a principle, it's an irrefutable, totally dependable principle of biology, this adaptation response to demand. I'll then suggest this idea that pain neuroscience education, or explaining pain, was pretty naive, and I take a big chunk of the responsibility for that. I always feel like I need to almost apologise to the field for the naivety with which we went about that. And it's good. So it's not outstanding, excellent, or very good. It's good. And it's not satisfactory or bad. Then I'll suggest that we're not the only experts in the room. There's healthcare professionals and scientists and pain scientists, neuroscientists, epidemiologists. We're not the only experts in the room. There are new wave treatments that are working according to the standards of the wider field. And we can be way better at what we do. We can be way better at what we do, like so much better. Anyway, complexity of pain makes things tricky. So if you're looking at this, if you haven't seen this before, this is out of a book that I co-authored, which you should all buy. I'm just working out, like if you all buy it, I get about half of them. It's not bad, it's like £2. If you have a look at these people, you will probably all recognise these people as normal-looking and probably reasonably attractive human beings. Would you agree? Are you suspecting? Yeah, they're probably good-looking. Yeah. Does anyone look at them and think, oh, they are just so ugly, those people? No? Okay, well, when you realise they're ugly, I want you to shout out, ugly. Okay? As soon as you realise they're ugly, say, ugly. Ugly. Well done. Thanks, Cormac. So that's bizarre, right? Let's have a look at that. Can you see it now? Go on, look at it. You can't see it. Occasionally, some people can work out, oh, yeah, there is something a bit weird. I can see that mouth's upside down. And if you visited the Brain Bus, you might have seen a great version of this with Obama, a photo of Obama. Our brain looks at these data, and I think this is a really powerful demonstration of sensory data is a significant portion of what the brain is using to produce experience, but it's not the only stuff. And the brain will overrule or will make a different decision according to previous experience, according to recognisable patterns. We've been here before, we've seen these. The brain knows, oh yeah, they're faces. Oh no, they're faces. And it's not until we give really confronting sensory data that the brain thinks, oh, that's not right. So that's about the world out there. And I've done a couple of public talks this week, which have just been fantastic. I love those opportunities to sit down with 30 or 40 general public who are in a world of trouble and just chat about some of the opportunities that complexity brings us, and acknowledge in that moment, also acknowledge the complexity and the challenge that it brings us as well. That's telling us about what's out there. Well, sensory data from our body tell us about what's in here, and we can apply exactly the same principles. But the sensory data are important, for sure, but the brain recognises patterns and computes a whole lot of information in order to produce an experience of what's in here. And should we do something about it or not? So we used to think that pain worked like this, and if you've ever heard me speak before, you would have seen a version of this. And I put this slide up at the World Congress on Endometriosis, and I apologise that I'd put a toe where the uterus should be. And I got corrected that there are some people who have toe tissue in the uterus. Is that a surprise to anyone else? I was very surprised to hear that. Anyway, it's happened, apparently. There's a case study. There's a toe growing inside a woman's uterus. Isn't this extraordinary? You didn't think you'd learn that tonight, right? If pain worked like that, then we can't explain situations like this. So this is just experimental data. We can't explain why, if it works like that in violinists, the left hand is more sensitive to stuff than the right hand. We can explain it logically, intuitively, but we can't explain it on that system. We can't explain why one of the people who came on the tour this week, who had had a history of horrible shoulder and arm pain and had recovered from that, and sometime later bought a new car and was driving the car. Things were a little bit stressful at that time, and then all of a sudden her shoulder pain's back. We can't explain that with the old system. We also can't explain why she can recognise that she's in the same car type, not exactly the same car, but the same make and model and colour as the car in which she was driving when she had her accident that started the injury. And she recognised that, and she put on her favourite tunes and the pain went away. We can't explain those things with a model that just says this is a single line, single cause, single contribution to pain sort of situation. We can't explain this scenario. If you came into our lab in Adelaide and participated in a finger squeezing experiment, it'd be great fun, you'd love it. If you squeeze your own finger with a finger squeezer to a certain pressure and you get that much pain, take your finger out, and then we get your friend to apply the finger squeezer, and now that would hurt a little bit more. And if it was not your friend, but it was a researcher in the group, to do exactly the same pressure on your finger, it would hurt a bit more. Now, the differences are not that big, all right? That's just so I can make the point. But the distances are dependable. They're a clear principle of how the system works. The event is exactly the same, but there's a different need to protect in these three scenarios. This system could not provide a dynamic protective buffer, which is what we all have. And as healthcare professionals, you guys intuitively will know that you have a dynamic protective buffer. And if you're someone who experiences persistent pain, you'll know that the pain goes up and down. It's a dynamic buffer. That system can't explain it. So I started doodling about, what do we know about pain? What are the stuff that we have strong empirical evidence influences pain in the moment? And I've drawn this version of it. So this one could explain those scenarios. And the point of this is not to say, okay, so we're going to work through all these systems. It's to say this is a really complex, really sophisticated, really powerful protective system. We're trying to get that into educational interventions in a way that's compelling and memorable. So this is a still out of the virtual reality guys, Reality Health. This is a still shot, so you'd be wearing your goggles, and this person that you can just vaguely see the head here is about 10 metres tall in front of you. And we're giving you the idea that sensory data come into this system telling you, yeah, everything's good, or there's something that's quite different here. And ultimately we can group sensory data like that. Yep, everything's as we would predict, or something's different here. Where historically, and possibly hysterically, we have talked about that being danger messages. And now we talk about it being something's different messages. And they come from all of these sensors we have across our body that detect changes in temperature, chemistry, load, movement, pressure. And we can think about there being an amplifier inside the brain that adjusts the data, which has the capacity to cause you to act in a way. And this is just a pain scale here. So some of you might recognise these concepts from the protectometer ideas, if you've ever seen those. So now in interventions and in trying to understand why people hurt and why people keep hurting and trying to work out what's the best thing we can possibly do to help someone recover, we have to consider the entire pain system. We can't just keep focusing on that tissue. And this is not a new message, right? Many of you would know this message. But we've spent certainly the biggest part of the last decade trying to work out how do we get these concepts across in a way that's compelling and changes behaviour. So bioplasticity makes all this a lot trickier because in the 1980s it was discovered that the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, so where the sensory data first come into the spinal cord and interface with other neurons, that learns. And it's called central sensitisation. And most of you, I imagine, have heard of central sensitisation. And that was a game changer for our field because it clearly manifests in allodynia, so things that did not hurt now hurt, and in hyperalgesia, so things that did hurt now hurt more. And allodynia and hyperalgesia result from changes in sensitivity, either in the tissues because of inflammation or injury and inflammation, or we thought then in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, and we thought they're the two locations, which was cool until the late 80s when it was discovered that exactly the same things change in the thalamus. And then since then, we've learned that actually learning happens all over this system. So we can, as a scientist, we talk about stimulus response profiles. So if we were to look at any single part of this system, we would see a change in the stimulus response profile of that component over time. And there's so many places it can change. And you might notice that I've circled the gut. We know the microbiome is relevant to pain, particularly with persistent pain. It's relevant. It's not going to be okay, everyone needs to start having a low inflammatory diet and everything will be fixed. It's not that situation, but we know that the reactions that happen in there undergo learning so that the stimulus response profile gets bigger. And that all makes sense. Like if you think about it, if you think there's an organism that is trying to protect itself and hasn't been able to do it yet, and it has inbuilt within it the capacity to just increase the protection further and further and further, that's a cool thing, right? I really hope you can get excited about, wow, that's a sophisticated, evolved capacity. What's really shit about it is that pain becomes the problem, and our ways of dealing with it in our world don't solve it, and it just keeps ramping up and up. And this is the pain that people live with and die from sometimes. Now, I think it's simultaneously so exciting and really confronting for us. This is from Tame the Beast, which is an animation that I was involved with, which is a patient-targeted resource that my kids thought was pretty funny because there's an animated me. I didn't know they were doing an animated me, by the way. I thought I just did the voiceover, and then they showed it to me, and the exquisite Charlotte at the time thought it was quite funny that I had no neck. Anyway, the story of that is this loyal friend that protects us and keeps us safe becomes a horrible beast, becomes the problem. And this week I've had the privilege of talking with people who are at various stages of recovery journeys from chronic pain. And the words they use for their pain are words like brutal, savage, terrifying. And we, as healthcare professionals, we cannot let go of that reality. Just because it's hard, it makes us want to let go of that. The fact that we learn that in the community out there that people are commentating on where pain care and pain science and education is going, there have been some people saying, oh, you can't learn pain. You don't have all these learning in the system. The fact that our system learns in so many ways, beautiful and complex ways, shouldn't be surprising when Charles Darwin, this is not Charles Darwin's work, but Charles Darwin showed that plants learn the relationship between things. So there's data showing classical conditioning in plants. Just look a bit amazed, like that's pretty cool. A slime mould, which has one cell, slime mould makes decisions about the balance between food and sunlight in a similar way to a group of 1,000 humans does. And it learns aversive reactions to things like quinine, and then through exposure it starts to learn, actually, it's not going to kill me, and it's no longer aversified by quinine. You know what I mean? And then it gets a new toxin, and it is. So slime mould, a unicellular organism, learns. Of course we are going to learn. This paper at the bottom here is legitimate science where people use slime mould to map where you should put the roads and things in urban design. They use a model using slime mould, and it's actually solved the railway system of Japan as well as the Japanese railway engineers solved it. Same thing in Germany, and then they tested it in Great Britain. And I hate to say it, but slime mould could have designed your railway system way more efficiently than you guys did. So we call this thing pain system hypersensitivity. If you're in the hood, you might have heard of nociplastic pain, or nociplastic contributions to pain is how I like to think about it. We asked 520 people with a lived experience of pain, do you think we should call it nociplastic? What do you think we should call it? And this was their favourite. They came up with this and said, call it pain system hypersensitivity, which is what we call it. And this is mediated, this massive protective buffer here is mediated by learning within the system. But there's lots of ways the system can learn, and it's not the same for everyone. Everyone is unique. There are certainly consistent patterns. But the challenge we get is that we get this massive sensitivity to stuff. Movements, behaviours, but also other things like memories, like viruses, like certain environments, like driving a car that resembles the one that you got injured in. We have this hypersensitivity to potentially threatening, or sometimes erroneously, things that are not threatening at all. The problem is that that's exactly what injury does. It's exactly what injury and inflammation do to us. They make us very sensitive, mainly to movement, right? Injury and inflammation makes us sensitive to mechanical load. But for people with a lived experience of pain system hypersensitivity, those two things feel the same. But they've only got the one model here to explain their experience. So they hang on to that model. And if we start to say that model's wrong and they don't have another one, what they're getting is the message, you're wrong. This is not real. You ask anyone with lived experience of persistent pain, do you think it's real? you're going to get a pretty clear answer, or you're going to get what we in Australia call this the fuck off posture. They feel the same, but their causes are different. This one's pretty easy for us as healthcare professionals. We can usually see it, scan it, turn it off, nuke it, burn it, numb it. This one's hard. This one's really hard for us. So where's the hope? Why am I so excited about this when I can see all this complexity? Well, I think it's scientifically based hope, and the hope lies in shifting the focus of our care towards the contributors to the problem. And there is a piece of gold dust in here that I will move on with, which is so relevant to the Flip and Pain campaign, is that understanding is a key component in engaging with this system and then starting a recovery journey. So pain neuroscience education, that's why we started it. This was the first clinical trial, a randomised controlled trial of intensive neurophysiology education in chronic low back pain, bad title, in people with chronic low back pain. And the idea was to give people at that stage a modern understanding of how pain works. Because even then we knew it's not this single line thing, it's a complex, multifactorial issue. We just now realise it's way more complex than we thought it was then. We might call it intensive neurophys education or pain neuroscience education. Other people have called it therapeutic neuroscience education, explaining pain, all those words. There were 5 randomised controlled trials done at the end of last millennium on the basis of those trials with consistent effects that were good. I ran into a guy who is a national treasure in Australia, a very inspiring guy, and some of you would have met him, and that's David Butler. And David said, you know these clinical trials you've been doing, this is what I've been doing with patients as well. Do you want to write a book together? So we wrote this book, and the reason I tell you this story is that certainly I was very keen to not tell anyone about this intervention until the randomised controlled trials showed that it was at least good. And I think in the physio field and in healthcare professions in general, we jump the gun on that, and we have to dig ourselves out of a world of bother. So I was very keen to avoid that mistake. But there are only 5 small randomised controlled trials, but since then there are 40 that are either conducted, published, or the protocols are available, so they're underway. And they come up with pretty consistent results. There are some meta-analyses on this. In fact, Cormac, who's down the front row, has done some of the leading work on secondary analysis of the body of literature on this. And I think consistently it shows, yeah, it's good. Good means that it's better than not doing anything. So I simultaneously think about this and I think, yeah, okay, so that was good, but it's not as great as maybe I've suggested it is. And I think that was my own naivety. But network meta-analysis published in British Medical Journal that looks at all psychological interventions for chronic low back pain concludes that pain education and active care provides the largest and sustainable improvements in back pain. So even though it's only good, it's the best good, or it's not the best good, it's as good as anything else. That's probably more accurate to say that. What about real-world data? So these are the data that have got me both a bit feeling slightly guilty to the field, feeling like I need your forgiveness, but also feeling excited. So these are data from 860 patients, all of whom participated in explaining pain from a highly trained healthcare professional, physio, exercise physiologist, or psychologist, I think, in these data. I've divided, so this is their average score for pain when they turn up for treatment. And this is their average score a month later, so nothing changes in that first month. And what I've done here is divide them into 2 groups. So this is the whole group, average pain, 5.2 out of 10, so they're in trouble. Average duration of pain, long. Almost any diagnosis is included in these data. What I've divided up is the blue dots are the people who in this first 3 or 4 weeks, and sometimes it went up to 6 weeks, they clearly showed a flip in their understanding of how pain works, clearly, through questionnaire results and interviews and strategic questions. The people who are in this red ball here, they did not. But they've all had explained pain from a highly trained healthcare professional. And then we follow them over time. So the great news, the good news is that half of these people who flip their understanding a year later have a genuinely excellent outcome. Here we're talking words like recovery. And these are all sorts of diagnoses. That's good news. About 50% of them flip their understanding of pain's simple and as one cause to pain's complex, bioplasticity. You can retrain the system. The other half, they didn't get any better at all. And these, we're getting a hit rate of 1 in 2 for highly trained physiotherapists. They're all trained by me. And I thought, yeah, you're all good. 1 in 2. So I'm really sorry that I think I overplayed this over time. It applies to neuropathic pain, so the primary diagnosis is neuropathic pain, and this is a really interesting finding because there's a common feel that, well, neuropathic pain, we can't really change it. But the pattern is pretty similar. It's not as good, I think that's pretty clear. Like the outcomes for those who flip their understanding of this, they're probably half as good a year later. This is people with osteoarthritic knee pain as their primary diagnosis. They're behaving like everyone else. These are people with chronic fatigue syndrome as their primary diagnosis, and they were instructed to change the word pain to fatigue and just understand it in exactly the same way. There's widespread old pelvic pain, exactly the same pattern. So diagnosis doesn't seem to matter. And we had at the public event a guy called Mac the other night, wherever we were, who his argument was what he thought in the pain management program is that the people in his group who flipped their understanding, who got it, and who decided, I'm going to understand this. And in Mac's words, they seemed to do really well no matter what their diagnosis was. And they were Mac's words. And I would agree that the data suggests that. So I think these data, this is the most cited paper in the Premier Pain Journal in 2016, I think because it's powerful in 2 ways. Explaining pain is working half the time. It's not a great hit rate. But when it works, it seems to be amazing. If people learn how pain works, they hurt less, and the long-term benefit appears substantial regardless of diagnosis. And we've got to suck it up and face the facts. We're not very good at it as educators. So I wonder if this is the formula, that excellent plus useless over 2 equals good. So what we thought was important in 1998 is what went into explaining pain, and what we thought was the best way to deliver it was how we started to deliver it, and primarily didactic pain talks. This is how pain works. Almost like we're saying, well, grab a whole lot of explained pain, you can put it in with everything else you're doing, and just shove it into your head. It's not a great model. But actually, we're not the only experts in the room. So over the last 10 years, we've sought out the opinions of 350 recovered persistent pain patients, and we've asked them a range of questions. That's come out in a range of papers. The data are published in a range of papers, and the primary authors here are Hayley Leake and Carolyn Berryman, and Hayley Leake is our hero because she won Survivor Australia in 2020 or something. PhD student in our group. Remarkable person, but really the work behind crunching these data is really down to Carolyn and Hayley. And we've done it in 3 cohorts of people, but I'm just going to show you what we did for one cohort. Everyone who is assessed is asked, would you be prepared to receive a link in 12 or 18 months' time, just asking you how you did. It would be an anonymous survey. Most of them consent, so there's a little number there, 137 were assessed, and there were 8, I think, who did not consent. And then in the survey, the general theme of it is that we asked the people who are improved, so better, much better, or recovered, what are the most important things you learnt for your recovery? So why do you think you recovered? What are the most important things? Did a bunch of stuff to make sure they weren't saying things that were scientifically not plausible or against the best evidence. You know, we didn't want people saying, I recovered because I learned how to cup myself. And then we'd go up and check that, well, that cupping's not a very evidence-based treatment. So we just cross-checked it with the science and then grouped it into themes. So over 11 years, we've had 350 recovered consumers, 36 scientists and clinicians, 6 different disciplines of science and 7 different disciplines of clinical practice. And we came up with what we think is the what of pain education. What are we going to focus on? What's the thing that seems to apply to the most people who say, yeah, that was important for me? And that gives us these target topics. And the target topics, this is what we talk about in Pain Revolution, which is Australia's version of Flippin' Pain. They're topics, they're not statements. But rather than spend a lot of time on that, I want to fast forward because we went to a marketing company and said, okay, how can you get them down into just a few core statements? And these are the statements they came up with. Pain protects us and promotes healing. Persistent pain overprotects us and prevents recovery. Many factors influence pain, and therefore, there are many things you can do to reduce pain and gradually retrain your system. And we said to those 520 consumers, what should we call those target concepts? And they said, call them the essential pain facts. So that you're always nervous as a scientist calling anything a fact, because you're not meant to have facts, right? You just have the next theory. But that's what they've called them, so have we. This applies to people with pelvic pain, so this is new work from Millie Marden. Again, Hayley's involved and Jane Chalmers. This is just a top-notch group of researchers that, through a qualitative process, have asked women who have recovered from endometriosis and pelvic pain, and they come up with very similar target concepts, so very similar to the essential pain facts. And then in 1998, we did it the way that we thought we should do it, right? Oh, I thought I had some more slides there, but let me come back to that. Oh, no, that's because these 3 trials, I would say, are the new wave of treatments that are getting published in really significant general medical journals that are centred around changing your understanding of the problem. One of those trials I was involved with, it's the Resolve trial, and that's a classic didactic explain pain intervention followed by a series of other targeted interventions within the framework of education is key, and reframing this problem as an information processing or brain and body problem. This is the results of the active treatment group in the Resolve trial is there, and these are the people who are allocated to a sham placebo trial that we designed very, very carefully to try and match as much as we could of the active intervention. So this is the outcome of a complex care package structured around the old style explaining pain that we now know works about half the time in the real world. These are data from the pain reprocessing therapy, which is a treatment in the US, which uses explain pain and exactly the same type of intervention initially, and then takes a more cognitive, less body part focused approach than the Resolve trial took. This is their results here. So they're they're in less pain to start off with. Good results that are maintained at a year. This is what happened in the group that got either usual care, so keep doing what you're doing, or we're going to give you 2 placebo injections. So you know they're placebos, we'll give it to you. So the comparison, the effect sizes come out to compare those 2 groups. This is a trial that was just published about 2 weeks ago in The Lancet. It's Peter O'Sullivan's group looking at cognitive functional therapy. Cognitive functional therapy, don't worry about reading all this. Try to prevent yourself from reading all this. But the first component was making sense of pain. And then if you move down here, to help them reconceptualise their low back pain from a biopsychosocial perspective. Key proponents, and they're not doing explain pain, but that's the target is to reconceptualise the problem. So a different way of getting at the same problem. This is what happened to pain in this group, so very similar to the others, and they used a usual care comparison that doesn't change. So they're the results of the control groups in these 3 trials. And the reason I put that up is I think this is really interesting. That if you use usual care or open label placebo, nothing's going to change. So this is a little bit like the people who didn't learn the same outcomes as the people who didn't learn the key objectives during pain education. This is what happened. So this is data that's currently under review from Sarah Warwork in our group, who's analysed all the available data for the course of low back pain, chronic low back pain, published in the world. It's a massive data set, 25,000 people I think are in it. And if we do nothing at all, and they go about their usual treatment selections, this is what will happen. So the usual course of low back pain is better than using usual care as a control group in a trial. All of these treatments are grounded in reconceptualising the problem of understanding how pain works, that pain is not a measure of the state of the tissues, it's a protective thing and it ramps up and it becomes biopsychosocial. They're all grounded in that. They have slightly different approach or different approaches to presenting it. Particular cognitive functional therapy is different. They're all better than usual care or the comparison, and all of the effect sizes here would make a pharmaceutical company executive very excited. You've got to understand that an effect size against sham of 1, that CEO, they're made for life. That drug will sell, right? Absolutely will sell. There's a problem with some of these things. So cognitive functional therapy requires a physio to then do 80 hours of face-to-face training with Facebook, peer-to-peer and on-demand mentoring. Resolve is a physio or a P and 18 hours of training. And pain reprocessing therapy was all delivered by one individual. So we're not there yet, right? We've got a lot of work to do. We certainly can't implement CFT with this model, right? We just don't have the resources to give 80 hours of training to all the physios out there to be able to do it. We don't really have the resources to do this either, Resolve. But we're moving towards better outcomes for people, better treatments. I'm going to skip this one, except to say that the result of this mediation analysis that we did showed that in Resolve, the thing that matters is change beliefs. It's a mediation analysis. So changing beliefs is important. The most difficult thing for patients, changing beliefs. Most difficult thing for healthcare professionals, changing beliefs. This is great work from Cormac's group looking at qualitative approaches to understanding how patients feel about didactic pain education or other types of pain education. It's really challenging, but we can be way better educators. So we started exploring this, and I have to absolutely give credit to David Butler, who said to me probably 10 years ago, Loza, you've got to go and have a look at the work of this person. And I have. And there are a few learning frameworks that you can apply to education. This is just one of them, the one that our group has worked with the most. It's called ICAP. It really should be PACI because it's back to front. ICAP stands for, if you go from the back, passive, active, constructive, inventive. Or interactive, but I like to call it inventive. And if we were looking at, okay, what's the least effective version in here? It's passive, and that's pretty much what we've been doing since we started this. Showing people videos, getting them to read a book, giving talks to them, slideshows, all that sort of stuff. That's not bad, that's good, but it's not the best. We can make it better by making it active. And I think the motto here is let's move them, get them moving or get them moved emotionally in this, actively involved in the scenario. We might do pain biology role play where we get people to move things around. So this is a little fake dachshund, which is a toll-like receptor on an astrocyte looking at a molecule, and we get people to play the role of those things in order to understand, well, how is it that when you're sick, your pain gets worse? So actively involved. We do a thing called Salad, where we don't just give people a book, we give people a book and say, okay, here's 5 highlighter pens. Highlight the bits of this book that make you surprised, annoyed, that lose you, that apply to you or that you disagree with. Come back and we'll talk about it. We'll understand that together. Or constructive. Generating new information, or interactive, using the protectometer. And I want to be really quick on this, but there's some really interesting real-world implementation data now on using the didactic pain education plus the protectometer here, which is just a way of thinking through how your pain works. Don't forget that. This is in veterans in Australia. So this work's done by Libby Roughhead, University of South Australia, looking at, can we reduce opioid usage through an education-based approach centred around these concepts, and they get to deal with every veteran who presents to a GP and says, I'm in pain. The data gets logged and they find out, so they can target education to that individual. This is her data, and this is complex modelling behind this, but the orange dots here are what, all other things considered, would have been the predicted rate of opioid prescriptions per 1,000 veterans. And this is where the intervention was on the blue line, and this was the actual rate. Another way of putting it, with Libby's data, the interventions here were these crosses, and modelling everything else. That program attributes the drop in opioids that's in this graph to a targeted education program for veterans who present with pain. Similar effect happening on Lyrica, which is a big deal in Australia now, probably a big deal here as well. So old school explaining pain is sort of good, but when learning occurs, outcomes are excellent. Can we get better at learning? Well, have a look at this, see if you relate to this idea, that here's the healthcare professional here, telling a whole lot of stuff to the patient. Modern pain science isn't easy to understand or explain. Health professional says, let me treat you with modern pain science. Raise your hand if you've ever said that to a patient, or you've sort of thought it, but you haven't wanted to say it like that. Oh, I'm going to try the pain science approach. Thanks for your honesty in the back row. Well, I reckon sometimes we get this, right? In Australia, we get the fuck off posture. All our data coming in from Pain Adelaide, which is a big group of clinicians spread across Adelaide and South Australia. Pain Revolution is saying, the most difficult part of my job is getting an understanding of modern pain science across to patients. That's the most difficult part of what I do with chronic pain patients. And sometimes they say, so I don't do it anymore. It's too hard. Or I do it, I bust my gut and I'm exhausted at the end of the day, and then I find out they've been off to someone else and they've said, no, you've got to slipped something. The key learning in all of this is that we need better ways of delivering high quality, standardised pain education that works. So that's where our group is focused at the moment, and we're engaging with a company that does it through virtual reality. This is a meta-analysis, massive meta-analysis of looking at learning outcomes in conventional versus virtual reality learning modules. And virtual reality learning modules are not just putting on the goggles and watching what you could watch on the computer. It's being actively involved in an environment that we can manipulate to have experiences to get across learning objectives. So this is the slides. This is from Reality Health. Don't just tell them stuff, show them stuff. So this woman here is looking at that. And this guy is about 10 metres tall, and you can see nerve signals coming up through stuff. And you can go right inside him and be inside his cavity and looking out. Like it is pretty cool stuff. This is an experience. Don't worry about the sound of this. I'll talk you through it. But this is an experience where you put your hands near the hot coals and you feel your hands get warm. Can you hear that up the back or not? So that's an experience they get, and they feel warm hands, and that's a cool thing. The clinician's there with them and says, so why do you think you're feeling warm hands? You're in a lab or in a clinic. Why is that the case? And there are a range of experiences that they've got, given the idea of persistent pain being like leaving a plaster cast on for too long. What happens to your hand when you take the plaster cast off? Or standing over a cliff and saying, do you want to walk out onto the cliff, out onto the plank? No, why not? I'm scared. Why? You're just in the clinic, so you're having this interaction. So it's a really powerful thing to see. Your feelings make you behave in a way. Get the idea of overprotection from oversensitive car alarms. You can look up close at facet joints and see the lubrication as you move, and you're right inside the facet joint or in the knee joint. Or getting an understanding of bioplasticity by doing a task with your left hand or your right hand and seeing the big guy, the big brain, just seeing neural pathways change as you do that. That's a compelling experience. So there's a range of experiences they have. We've only got very preliminary data on this. I think Cormac's group is also evaluating similar or the same platform. Same platform. This is the hit rate of learning objectives with highly trained healthcare professionals doing 1-to-1 for 45 to 90 minutes, about 50%. This is the hit rate so far with limited training healthcare professionals, 6 modules, 8 to 12 minutes each, but the healthcare professional is with them. It's not you take this home and do it. It's part of the treatment. Whew. I went as quickly as I could, sorry about that. I want to just give a shout out to this thing that Cormac and I have set up. It's called PEDAL. It really stands for Pain Education Team of Absolute Legends, but for the purpose of grant applications, it's Pain Education Team Aspiring Better Learning. It's an international group, and I want to take the opportunity in public space to acknowledge your incredible contribution to this, Cormac, but also to the field. Actually, you're really important in the field, so congratulations for your work you do there. This is Pain Revolution, which is a bit like Flippin' Pain. And this is some of the clever, kind and community-minded people that make up the Body and Mind Research Group at University of South Australia. I'm done. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Professor Lorimer Moseley. I think it was not lost on anyone in the room or watching on the live stream how incredible it is to have Lorimer here on a Friday night in Durham for free. So thank you very much appreciated.